The morning of March 10, 1945, broke cold and gray over Guam. The sun barely penetrated the thick layer of clouds hanging over North Field, where rows of Boeing B-29 superfortresses sat like sleeping giants on the tarmac. Their polished aluminum skins glistened with morning dew, and the smell of aviation fuel mixed with salt air from the Pacific Ocean just beyond the runway. Captain Robert "Bob" Fitzgerald stood outside the briefing hut, smoking his last cigarette before the mission. He was 24 years old but looked older. 3 months of flying combat missions over Japan had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there when he left California. His leather A2 jacket hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight, like most of them had. The food was terrible, the stress constant, and sleep came in short, nightmare-interrupted bursts. "You ready for this one, Skipper?" Lieutenant Tom Hendricks appeared beside him, his breath visible in the cool air. Hendricks was the co-pilot, a farm kid from Iowa with steady hands and nerves that rarely showed cracks. Fitzgerald took a long drag and flicked the cigarette away. "Ready as I'll ever be." But he wasn't ready. None of them were ready for what Tokyo had become. Inside the briefing hut, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and nervous energy. 78 men sat on wooden benches, representing the crews of 7 B-29s from the 497th Bombardment Group. They wore their flight suits unzipped, revealing sheepskin collars and various combinations of shirts and sweaters beneath. Some had Lucky Charms hanging from their necks. Others clutched rosaries or rabbit's feet. Major William Preston stood at the front beside a large map of Japan. He was a weathered combat veteran who'd flown B-17s over Germany before transferring to the Pacific. His face was expressionless as he pulled back the curtain covering the mission board. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "today's target is Tokyo." No reaction. They'd hit Tokyo before. Specifically, the industrial district of Koto Ward. Intelligence estimates over 250 factories producing war materials. Ball bearings, aircraft components, small arms. The whole area is a legitimate military target. He paused, and in that pause, every man in the room felt the weight of what was coming. Altitude, 5,000 feet. The room erupted. 5,000, someone shouted. "That's suicide. We'll be sitting ducks for every gun in the city." Preston raised his hand, waiting for silence. "I know it's low. Command knows it's low. But we're carrying incendiaries, and they need to be accurate. The M69 clusters work best at low altitude. Better pattern, better coverage. This is going to be a fire mission, gentlemen. We're going to burn them out." Fitzgerald felt his stomach tighten. Fire missions were different. This wasn't about precision bombing of factories or bridges. This was about creating firestorms, about destroying entire districts. He'd heard about what the British were doing to German cities. Dresden was still smoking when he'd read about it in Stars and Stripes 2 weeks ago. "Expected opposition?" someone asked. "Heavy flak. Searchlights. Fighters scrambling from surrounding airfields. Weather reports indicate broken clouds over the target area, which should help with concealment on approach." Preston's eyes scanned the room. "I won't lie to you. This is going to be rough. But if we do this right, we can break their industrial capacity. We can shorten this war." The briefing continued with technical details: formations, radio frequencies, alternate targets, emergency procedures. Fitzgerald tried to focus, but his mind kept returning to the altitude. 5,000 feet. They'd be low enough to see faces. Low enough to see what they were doing. After the briefing, the crews dispersed to their aircraft. Fitzgerald's B-29, designated Lucky Linda after his wife back in San Diego, sat at Hardstand 17. The ground crew had already loaded her with 4,500-pound clusters of M69 incendiary bombs. Each cluster would break apart at 2,000 feet, releasing dozens of smaller bomblets designed to spray burning napalm gel over a wide area. Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski, the flight engineer, was already running his pre-flight checks. He was a Brooklyn native who could fix anything mechanical and had a habit of talking to the airplane like it was alive. "How's she looking, Ski?" Fitzgerald called up through the forward hatch. "She's good, Captain. Number 3 engines running a little hot, but nothing I can't handle. Oil pressure's solid across the board." Kowalski's voice echoed from somewhere inside the massive fuselage. Fitzgerald climbed aboard and made his way forward to the cockpit. The B-29 was enormous, 99 feet long with a wingspan of over 140 feet. Inside, it was a maze of cables, hydraulic lines, fuel tanks, and ammunition boxes. The pressurized cabin sections were connected by a long tunnel that ran over the bomb bays. Everything smelled like oil, metal, and sweat. The rest of the crew assembled at their stations. Technical Sergeant James "Doc" Morrison, the radio operator, settled into his position just behind the cockpit. Sergeant Carl Lewis, the radar operator, squeezed into his compartment in the nose. In the rear compartment, past the bomb bays, the 3 gunners, Sergeants Miller, Patterson, and young Billy Chen, checked their weapons and tested the movement of their turrets. Navigator Lieutenant Harold Banks spread his charts across the small table in the nose compartment. He was a mathematics professor from Boston who navigated with a precision that bordered on obsessive. "Course plotted, Captain. 1,400 miles to target. 5 hours, give or take, depending on winds aloft." Bombardier Lieutenant Frank Russo settled into the seat beside Banks. Russo was from the Bronx, a former architecture student who now specialized in destroying buildings. His hands were already on the Norden bomb site, making microscopic adjustments that would determine where 20 tons of fire fell from the sky. At 1330 hours, the engines coughed to life one by one. The Wright R-3350 radials were temperamental beasts, 18 cylinders each, producing 2,200 horsepower, and prone to overheating, catching fire, or simply failing without warning. But when they ran right, they sang a deep, powerful chorus that Fitzgerald had come to love. "Northfield Tower, this is Lucky Linda requesting taxi clearance." "Lucky Linda, you are cleared to taxi. Runway 24. Wind is 10 knots from the east. Altimeter 299er2. Good hunting." The bomber rolled forward, her 70-ton weight pressing deep into the coral runway. 6 other B-29s followed in sequence, their propellers cutting the air with a sound like distant thunder. Fitzgerald pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. The runway blurred beneath them as Lucky Linda accelerated, faster and faster until the moment when the rumbling stopped and they were airborne, climbing into the gray Pacific sky. Below, Guam shrank to a green speck in an endless expanse of blue. Ahead, 1,500 miles away, Tokyo waited. None of them knew that in 7 hours, half the crew would be unconscious, the aircraft would be shot to pieces, and Fitzgerald would be flying a dying machine with nothing but willpower and prayers keeping them in the air. The formation climbed steadily through the afternoon, 7 B-29s arranged in a loose combat box that would tighten as they approached Japanese airspace. At 10,000 feet, Fitzgerald leveled off and reduced power, settling into cruise configuration. The oxygen masks came on, and the interphone crackled with routine position reports from the crew. "Nav to pilot on course. ETA to landfall, 4 hours, 12 minutes. "Roger, Nav." The Pacific stretched endlessly below them, empty and indifferent. No ships, no islands. Just water reflecting the late afternoon sun in a million shifting mirrors. This was the loneliest part of any mission, the long hours over open ocean where there was nothing to do but think. Fitzgerald tried not to think about Linda. Before each mission, he wrote her a letter and left it in his footlocker, unsealed. If he didn't come back, someone would mail it. He'd written 47 letters so far. He'd mailed none of them. Hendricks handled the controls while Fitzgerald studied the instrument panel. Fuel consumption was nominal. Engine temperatures were climbing slightly as the number 3 cylinder heads ran hot, but Kowalski had been monitoring it and assured him it was within tolerances. The B-29 was a masterpiece of engineering and a maintenance nightmare in equal measure. When everything worked, it was the most capable bomber in the world. When things broke, and they often did, it could kill you faster than enemy fire. Pilot to crew, maintain radio discipline. Keep the chatter down. Oxygen check in 5 minutes. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Fitzgerald watched it sink, knowing that by the time they reached Tokyo, it would be full dark. That was intentional. The fire raid was planned as a night mission. Harder for fighters to intercept, harder for flak gunners to aim, and the fires would be more visible from altitude for the follow-up waves. They weren't alone up here. Somewhere ahead and to the sides were 334 other B-29s from multiple groups across the Marianas, all converging on Tokyo from different approach vectors. It was the largest single firebombing raid in history. The planners had calculated that if even 70% of the aircraft dropped their loads on target, they could create a firestorm that would consume 16 square miles of the city. 16 square miles. Fitzgerald tried to picture that. He tried to picture San Diego burning across 16 square miles, block after block of homes and shops and churches reduced to ash. Then he stopped trying. That's not how you survived this. You didn't think about what was down there. You thought about the target, the mission, getting home. Radar to pilot. I'm picking up weather ahead. Looks like a frontal system, maybe 40 miles out. What's it look like, Lewis? Scattered at first, then a solid layer. Tops around 18,000. We going through or around? Hendricks asked. Fitzgerald checked the fuel gauges. Through. We don't have the margin to detour. Banks, get me an updated wind calculation once we're past the front. Roger, skipper. 20 minutes later, they hit the clouds. The sky disappeared, replaced by gray nothingness. Rain hammered against the plexiglass nose. The airplane bounced and shuddered in the turbulence. This was always the worst part for the gunners in back, sealed in their compartment, unable to see forward, just feeling the aircraft buck and dive while they held on and trusted that the pilots knew what they were doing. "How are you boys doing back there?" Fitzgerald called over the interphone. "Peachy, sir," came Miller's voice, tight with forced calm. "Just peachy." They emerged from the clouds into clear air just as the last light faded from the western sky. Stars appeared overhead, sharp and cold. Below, still nothing but ocean, now invisible in the darkness. Nav to pilot, landfall in 30 minutes. Starting descent to attack altitude on your mark. This was it. The point of no return. All stations, this is pilot. We're beginning our descent. Arm your weapons. Stay sharp. Tokyo's going to be hot tonight. Fitzgerald pushed the yoke forward, and Lucky Linda's nose dropped. The altimeter unwound. 9,000, 8,000, 7,000. The air grew thicker, warmer. They were descending into the killing zone. At 22:40 hours, Banks called out, "Landfall." "We're feet dry." Fitzgerald looked down and saw the faint outline of the Japanese coast, darker than the sea but visible as a jagged line against the water. No lights. The entire country was blacked out, a vast shadow crouching beneath them. 5,000 feet. Leveling off. The interphone came alive with reports from other aircraft. "This is Big Time Charlie. We're taking flak at Grid Oscar 7. Dreamboat, we've got searchlights, northeast sector. Tokyo Rose is hit. Tokyo Rose is on fire." Fitzgerald's hands tightened on the yoke. His mouth was dry despite the oxygen flowing through his mask. Then he saw it. Ahead, perhaps 50 miles distant, The sky was turning orange. Not the orange of sunset. This was deeper, angrier, pulsing like a living thing. The first wave of B-29s had already hit their targets, and Tokyo was beginning to burn. "Jesus Christ!" Hendricks whispered. The glow grew brighter as they approached, and soon they could see individual fires, hundreds of them, spreading and merging. Smoke rose in enormous columns, black against the orange light, climbing to 20,000 feet and higher. "Bombardier to pilot, I have visual on the target area. Beginning bomb run." "Roger." "Bomb bay doors open." The doors rumbled apart beneath them, and immediately the aircraft became harder to control. The smooth airframe was disrupted, creating drag and turbulence. And then the flak started. The first bursts appeared ahead and to the left, white puffs of smoke blossoming in the darkness, each one marking a place where an 88mm shell had exploded. The Japanese gunners were firing blind, but with hundreds of bombers in the sky, blind firing was effective enough. A shell burst directly in front of them, close enough that Fitzgerald felt the concussion through the controls. Shrapnel pinged against the fuselage like hail on a tin roof. "Stay on course," Russo called from the nose. "Steady, steady." Another burst, closer this time. The aircraft shook. Warning lights flickered on the panel. "Number 3 engine losing oil pressure." Kowalski shouted. "Can you stabilize it?" "Working on it." They were over the burning city now, and even at 5,000 feet, the heat was incredible. Fitzgerald could feel it through the cockpit glass, the radiating warmth of thousands of fires consuming thousands of buildings. Below, the streets were rivers of flame. Entire blocks had vanished, replaced by solid fields of fire that moved and breathed like living organisms. "Bombs away," Russo called. The aircraft lurched upward as 20 tons of incendiaries fell away. Fitzgerald watched them tumble downward, the clusters breaking apart, the individual bomblets separating and spreading into a deadly rain of fire. They disappeared into the inferno below, and he couldn't tell where his bombs ended and the existing fires began. Bomb bay doors closed. "Let's get the hell out of here." Fitzgerald banked hard left, away from the target, climbing now, trying to gain altitude and distance from the worst of the flak. But the gunners were everywhere, and searchlights swept the sky in bright blue-white beams, hunting for bombers. One of the beams caught them. Instantly, the cockpit lit up like daylight. Fitzgerald was blind, unable to see his instruments, the sky, anything but pure white light. More searchlights converged, holding them in a cone of illumination. "They've got us locked." The flak intensified. Shells burst all around them, so close that the sound was a continuous roar. Something hit the right wing with a metallic bang. Another shell exploded beneath them, and the aircraft dropped 50 feet in a single sickening lurch. "Number 3 engine on fire," Kowalski yelled. Fitzgerald looked right and saw flames streaming from the nacelle, bright orange against the night sky. "Hit the extinguisher." "I'm on it." The fire suppression system discharged, smothering the flames in CO2. The fire died, but the engine was dead too, windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. "Feather number 3." Hendricks moved fast, adjusting the propeller pitch so the blades turned edge-on to the wind, reducing drag. The B-29 could fly on 3 engines, but not easily, and not for long. They were still trapped in the searchlights. Fitzgerald threw the aircraft into a diving turn, trying to break free. The maneuver worked, the beams slid off them, but it cost them another 1,000 feet of altitude. "Pilot to crew, damage report. Anyone hurt?" The responses came back one by one. Everyone was okay. Scared, but okay. Then Chen's voice came through, young and shaking. "Aft compartment to pilot. Sir, we've got holes all over back here. I can see stars through the fuselage. And the heater's out. It's getting cold. Can you patch the holes?" "We'll try, sir." Fitzgerald checked his instruments. Number 3 was gone. Number 2 was running rough. Oil pressure was dropping on number 4. Hydraulic pressure was fluctuating. They were losing fuel from somewhere, probably a punctured tank. And they were still 300 miles from the coast, with another 1,400 miles of ocean between them and Guam. They cleared the coast of Japan at 23:47 hours, limping eastward on 3 engines with a trailing plume of smoke visible in the moonlight. Behind them, Tokyo was a lake of fire that stretched to the horizon, so bright that it cast shadows inside the cockpit. Fitzgerald didn't look back. He was focused entirely on keeping the aircraft in the air. "Banks, give me a heading for Iwo Jima. We're not going to make Guam like this." The navigator worked his calculations quickly. Heading 135. Distance 680 miles. At current speed and altitude, 4 hours, maybe less if we can get more power. 4 hours. Fitzgerald looked at the fuel gauges. The needles were dropping faster than they should. "We're losing fuel. Kowalski, can you isolate which tank?" The flight engineer was already crawling through the fuselage with a flashlight, inspecting the fuel system. Minutes passed. Then his voice came back, strained. "Captain, we've got a problem. Number 2 tank is venting. Flak must have punctured the baffles. We're losing maybe 50 gallons an hour." Fitzgerald did the math in his head. At that rate, they'd run dry 50 miles short of Iwo. "Can you patch it?" "Not from inside. I'd need to get to the wing access panels, and we'd have to depressurize the cabin." "Do it. Hendricks, take the controls." "I've got it," the co-pilot said, his hands moving to the yoke. Fitzgerald unbuckled and moved aft, squeezing past Morrison's radio station and dropping down into the bomb bay section. The temperature dropped immediately. The pressurization was already failing in the aft compartment, and frigid air was streaming through the holes in the fuselage. He found Kowalski in the tunnel over the bomb bays, wrestling with an access hatch. Together they got it open, and the engineer squeezed part way into the wing cavity with his tools and a roll of aluminum tape. "How bad is it?" Fitzgerald shouted over the wind noise. "Bad enough." Kowalski worked fast, his hands already numb from the cold. "Got 3 holes, maybe 4. I can slow the leak, but I can't stop it." 10 minutes later, Kowalski emerged, frost in his eyebrows, hands shaking. "That's all I can do, Captain. Might have cut the loss in half. Might not." They made their way back to the cockpit. Fitzgerald strapped in and checked the gauges again. The fuel loss had slowed, marginally. It was something. But then number 2 engine began to shudder. The vibration started subtly, a slight roughness in the engine note. Within 30 seconds it had become a violent shake that rattled the entire aircraft. "Number 2's running away," Hendricks called out. Fitzgerald looked at the tachometer. The engine RPM was climbing, 2,400, 2,500, 2,600. The propeller governor had failed, and the engine was overspeeding, tearing itself apart. "Shut it down. Fuel cut off now." Hendricks yanked the mixture control to idle cut-off. The fuel flow stopped, but the engine kept spinning, windmilling in the airstream, the propeller blades an invisible blur. "It won't feather." Hendricks was fighting the controls, trying to adjust the propeller pitch, but nothing happened. "The feathering system's dead." A runaway propeller created enormous drag, like trying to fly with an open parachute attached to the wing. The aircraft began to yaw right, pulling toward the dead weight of the spinning prop. Fitzgerald pushed left rudder to compensate, but it took constant pressure. His leg was already beginning to cramp. "Banks, recalculate. How long to Iwo on 2 engines?" The navigator's voice came back quiet. "We won't make it, skipper. Not with this drag and fuel consumption. We'll ditch about 200 miles short." "Ditching?" Fitzgerald had been trained for it, practiced it in simulators, but no B-29 crew had ever successfully ditched at night and survived. The aircraft was too heavy, too fast. Hitting the water at 120 miles per hour in total darkness was just another way to die. "Options," he said. "We could bail out," Hendricks suggested. "Get everyone in the rafts, signal our position, wait for rescue." "In these waters? We'd freeze to death in an hour." Fitzgerald shook his head. "We're staying with the ship. Morrison, send a distress signal. Give them our position, heading, and situation. Tell them we're trying for EWO but may have to ditch short." "Roger, sir." The radio operator began tapping out the message in Morse code, the series of dits and das that meant, "We are in trouble. We need help." But help was hundreds of miles away. The aircraft continued eastward, losing altitude gradually as Fitzgerald tried to balance speed, fuel consumption, and the need to keep flying. They dropped to 4,000 feet. Then 3,000. The ocean was invisible below them, just an endless darkness that could be 10 feet down or 10,000. At 1:15 hours, Chen's voice came over the interphone, and something in his tone made Fitzgerald's blood run cold. "Aft compartment to pilot, sir. Patterson's unconscious." "What?" "He just collapsed. He's breathing, but I can't wake him up." "Doc, get back there," Fitzgerald ordered. Morrison unstrapped and made his way aft. Minutes that felt like hours passed. Then the radio operator's voice returned. "Skipper, I don't know what's wrong with him. His breathing's shallow, pulse is weak. And Miller's saying he feels dizzy." Fitzgerald's mind raced. Oxygen system failure? Carbon monoxide leak? But the cockpit crew was fine. Whatever was happening, it was isolated to the rear compartment. Then Kowalski said it, "Captain, I think they've got hypoxia. Those holes in the fuselage, the compartment's not holding pressure. They're at 3,000 feet cabin altitude, but we're actually at 2,500, and with the oxygen system damaged back there." Christ. Fitzgerald made the decision instantly. "Everyone in the aft compartment, get on portable oxygen bottles. No. Chen, Miller, help Patterson get on a bottle." "Already doing it, sir." But portable bottles didn't last forever. They had maybe 30 minutes of oxygen back there, and they were still hours from land. "Banks, I need an update. Distance to EWO." 420 miles. Fitzgerald looked at the fuel gauges. They were running on fumes. He did the calculation in his head and arrived at an impossible answer. They would run out of fuel 60 miles short of the island. Unless they did something drastic. "Ski, inventory. Everything we can throw out of this airplane to lighten it. Ammunition, equipment, anything that's not bolted down." "On it." The crew began dumping weight. Ammunition cans went first, tossed out through the waist gun positions. Then the extra oxygen bottles, the toolkits, the spare radios, even personal equipment, everything that could reduce their weight by even a pound. The aircraft climbed slightly, responding to the reduced load. But not enough. At 2:30 hours, number 4 engine began to cough. It caught again, ran for 30 seconds, then coughed again. "Fuel starvation," Hendricks said quietly. "We're dry in the number 4 tank. Transfer from number 1. Already empty. We're running on number 3 tank, and it's showing 15 minutes of fuel." 15 minutes. Fitzgerald stared out at the darkness. Somewhere ahead was Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island that American Marines had captured just weeks ago at terrible cost. It had a runway. It had fuel. It had rescue crews. It might as well have been on the moon. "How far?" he asked. 80 miles. 80 miles in 15 minutes required 320 miles per hour. They were doing 180. "Morrison, send final position update." Tell them we're going down." The radio operator's hands trembled as he tapped the key. "Message sent, sir. Number 4 engine died." The aircraft lurched, and Fitzgerald fought the controls. On one engine, number 1, the only one still running, the B-29 was unflyable. They were too heavy, too damaged, too slow. They began to descend. "Altitude 2,200 feet," Hendricks read out. 2,100. 2,000. Fitzgerald's hands were locked on the yoke, his feet jammed against the rudder pedals, every muscle straining to keep the aircraft level. But physics was physics. With only one engine, they were falling out of the sky. "Brace for ditching," he shouted into the interphone. "Everyone to crash positions." In the aft compartment, Chen and Miller dragged Patterson's unconscious body to the safest position they could find and held on. In the nose, Banks and Russo braced themselves against the bulkheads. Morrison gripped his radio desk. The ocean rushed up to meet them. Fitzgerald could see it now in the moonlight, a silver-black surface that looked solid but would hit them like concrete. Altitude 1,000 feet. Speed 160 knots. He needed to hit the water as slowly as possible, as level as possible, or the impact would tear the aircraft apart. 500 feet. The last engine began to sputter. 300. And then, impossibly, through the plexiglass nose, Fitzgerald saw lights. Red and green lights. Runway lights. "EWO!" Banks screamed. "Dead ahead, 10 miles." The island had appeared out of nowhere, a dark mass rising from the ocean with a single strip of flat ground carved across its center. Mount Suribachi loomed to the south, and along the runway, the engineers had turned on every light they had. But they were still falling, still too low, still too slow. Number 1 engine died. The propeller stopped. The sound of the engines, the sound that had been constant for 7 hours, ceased. Now there was only the whistle of wind through the bullet holes and the creaking of overstressed metal. They were gliding.